Prosecutors and cops are sworn to protect and uphold the law and follow the rules. When they don't, when they lie, hide, and destroy evidence, and basically don't follow the rules, they ruin the lives and careers of hardworking, law-abiding, respected people, like Brooklyn dentist Dr. Leonard Morse. Dr. Morse's career was ruined after former state attorney general and disgraced former New York governor Eliot Spitzer indicted him for Medicaid fraud. Spitzer, who resigned after it was disclosed that he was using New York state campaign funds to live a secret sex-perverted prostitute-filled life as the love gov in a high-class prostitution ring, while still married to his former wife, Silda Alice Wall Spitzer. Spitzer made Dr. Morse a poster boy for Medicare fraud in his political campaign for New York governor in 2006. His office's illegal and unethical attempt to look strong on prosecuting Dr. Morse collapsed when Spitzer's key deputy, John Fusto, of the state's Medicaid fraud unit, confessed that Dr. Morse's so-called billing records were lies and had been fabricated. Morse was found not guilty of all charges. It can happen to any one of us. It can happen to you. Every year, there are hundreds of cases of prosecutorial misconduct, false arrest, and wrongful convictions that can happen in our justice system. Some prosecutors, police officials, and politicians with personal agendas call press conferences to launch inflammatory and usually false or grossly exaggerated claims about the importance of a given case, totally ignoring the facts in a rush to judgment. Examples are legion. Although the goal of every justice system is to provide fair and impartial judgments, more often than not, it doesn't work out that way, either because of concealed evidence, people being framed, or corrupt law enforcement. Prosecutors are the most powerful players in the American criminal justice system. Their decisions, like whom to charge with a crime and what sentences to seek, have profound consequences. So why is it so hard to keep them from breaking the law or violating the Constitution? The short answer is that they are almost never held accountable for misconduct, even when it results in wrongful convictions. It's time for a new approach to ending this behavior. Federal oversight of prosecutors' offices that repeatedly ignore defendants' legal and constitutional rights. There is a successful model for this in the Justice Department's monitoring of police departments with histories of misconduct. Among the most serious prosecutorial violations is the withholding of evidence that could help a defendant prove his or her innocence or get a reduced sentence, a practice so widespread that one federal judge called it an epidemic. Under the 1963 landmark Supreme Court case Brady versus Maryland, prosecutors are required to turn over any exculpatory evidence to a defendant that could materially affect a verdict or sentence. Yet in many district attorneys' offices, the Brady rule is considered nothing more than a suggestion, with prosecutors routinely holding back such evidence to win their cases. State courts often fail to hold prosecutors accountable, even when their wrongdoing is clear. And individual prosecutors are protected from civil lawsuits while criminal punishment is virtually unheard of. Money damages levied against a prosecutor's office could deter some misconduct, but the Supreme Court has made it extremely difficult for wrongfully convicted citizens to win such claims. This maddening situation has long resisted a solution. What would make good sense is to have the federal government step in to monitor some of the worst actors, increasing the chance of catching misconduct before it ruins people's lives. As Eliot Spitzer's office tried to do to Dr. Leonard Morse. In this insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Dr. Leonard Morse Story, we visit with John Norinsberg and John Meehan at Norinsberg Law and Dr. Leonard Morse. They successfully represented Dr. Leonard Morse in a civil rights lawsuit filed against former Attorney General Eliot Spitzer, as well as the prosecutor and chief auditor in the New York State Attorney General's office, and won a $7.7 million verdict. In this cautionary tale for Medicaid providers, Dr. Morse describes the political witch hunt that targeted him, the illegal and corrupt methods used by the state's attorneys to frame him and his long struggle to finally vindicate himself. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from New York. It is my great pleasure to introduce to the show John Norinsberg and John Meehan. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks so much, Steve. Great to be here.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about what your law firm does, mainly. Who do you represent?
So we specialize in civil rights litigation cases. We represent clients who've been falsely arrested, maliciously prosecuted, whose lives have been turned upside down by the government, by overzealous prosecutors or lying police officers. Essentially, we do civil rights cases in federal court, sometimes in state court. We try to do the best we can to get the clients back to where they were before the prosecutions took place.
That sometimes takes a lot of time and it's pretty difficult, isn't it, John?
No, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. A lot of our clients are indigent and cannot afford legal representation. So one of our great prides in our office is that we do not charge a cent for our representation. We zealously fight for these clients, sometimes as long as 10 years. Without receiving a cent.
Do you think that these huge payments that the city ends up paying out, $6 million to the Garner family, do you think it changes the conduct of the police?
Absolutely. I think every time the city is socked with a verdict like that, it goes back and institutes different guidelines and regulations and procedures that the police have to abide by because the comptroller's office is so fearful of another verdict that big. So absolutely. What I look at our job is really the district attorney's office of the police department. They're not going to regulate themselves. They're not going to hold themselves accountable. It's going to take a jury verdict to do that and to change policy.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that they're not going to do that. I mean, theoretically, because that's their job, right? Their job is to prosecute crime where they see it, whether it's in their own departments, right? Or whether it's outside their departments. Today, we are here about a case of one of your favorite clients, Dr. Leonard Morse. Can you please tell us a little bit about who he is and what happened to him?
Sure. Dr. Morse was a dentist who had a very successful practice for over 30 years, had never had any type of claim brought against him, was an upstanding member of the community, and all of a sudden he came into the crosshairs of a politician who was trying to make a name for himself, trying to show that he was tough on crime, and particularly tough on Medicaid fraud. So Dr. Morse at the time was one of the larger Medicaid billers in the state. That caught the attention of Eliot Spitzer, who was the Attorney General at the time, and he was running for governor. And Spitzer had been accused by his opponents of being weak on Medicaid fraud. And all of a sudden, Dr. Morse found himself indicted and being charged with stealing $1 million from Medicaid by Eliot Spitzer, who announced in a press release that this doctor had been indicted, that he stole $1 million from Medicaid, and this proves that his office is committed to weeding out this type of crime.
Now, he didn't see this coming, right? I'm talking about your client, Dr. Leonard Morse.
This was a complete shock and a surprise because his records had been subpoenaed 4 years before. 4 years went by, nothing was done. It wasn't until Spitzer was running for office to be governor where he first was indicted.
What happened? He turned himself in, from my understanding, right?
Yes.
He was out on bail. Some of the immediate repercussions of this allegation was he lost his ability to bill Medicaid, right?
He lost his income. For someone like Dr. Morse, 95% of his clients at that time were Medicaid clients. So that meant, as a practical matter, his office was shut down immediately as soon as he was indicted.
Yeah. Now, take me back to the timetable. They audited his records. It was over a 4-year period of time.
Right. It was 2002 is when they first subpoenaed the records.
And supposedly within those records, 4 years of records, they discovered, well, they accused him of basically fraudulently billing the state of almost $1 million.
That's correct.
And that was supposed to be evidenced by the records that they had been auditing, right?
Yes, but we eventually got an internal memo which said they had looked at the records and the investigation had reached a dead end. They did not have any evidence at all based on those records that he had done anything.
This is before you went to trial?
This is before he went to trial. We didn't discover this until we brought the civil lawsuit years later.
So he went to trial, he was acquitted. And I understand he was acquitted because one of the chief investigators, is that right, basically stated that they had fabricated some of the evidence. Is that right? 19 pages of the documents were lost or something, or fabricated?
Well,
what was it?
To be clear, I mean, that all came out in the civil trial. There were 19 months of 36 months. It was a 3-year audit period of the labs that Dr. Morse was dealing with. They lost 19 months of the records.
They meaning the investigators?
The investigators. And that came out, though, much later on. What happened during the criminal trial is they produced only 3 witnesses, 3 patients, but they weren't even patients of Dr. Morse. They were patients of his partner, Dr. Ketover. And the prosecutor had acknowledged at the criminal trial that even though Dr. Morse was charged with $1 million fraud, the best they could show would be a $3,000 fraud. And so it went from $1 million to $3,000, literally that much of a drop by trial.
Was that the smoking gun in the criminal case that got him acquitted?
It was a clear, turning point that where you have a prosecutor making that type of concession. But the smoking guns didn't come out until we instituted the civil lawsuit and saw about the lies that took place in the grand jury presentation, the manufactured evidence, the altered billing records. That was not known at the time. That wasn't discovered until we brought our lawsuit in civil court.
Soon after that, and that's what your firm does, you filed a lawsuit on his behalf. Against whom?
We sued Eliot Spitzer,
the Attorney General at the time?
Yes, he was still Attorney General and had become governor. We sued him. We sued
him personally?
We sued him personally. We sued the lead investigator, prosecutor on the case, John Fusto. We sued the lead senior auditor on the case, Jose Castillo, and we sued 2 of the lower level law enforcement officials that were involved with the case as well.
What happened almost immediately after you filed the suit? Somebody was dismissed out of it.
Well, they made a motion to dismiss, but a lot of years went by before that was eventually resolved. Eventually, Spitzer was let out of the lawsuit on the eve of trial.
Because?
Because he had certain immunities where he was able to shield himself from liability, and the judge did not allow us an opportunity to actually take his deposition and get sworn testimony.
Yeah, and that's important to bring up in this story because prosecutors and some law enforcement people have either qualified or absolute immunity, right?
That's correct.
And which means that a prosecutor can do something totally illegally, and the probability of being prosecuted is next to nothing, right?
Well, that's what makes the case so highly unusual, that not only was this prosecutor alleged to have fabricated evidence, but the jury actually found that he did. That's highly unusual. Normally, these cases are stopped at an earlier stage because of the immunity issue you just pointed out.
What was the eventual outcome of the case in terms of you held somebody liable? Who was that?
Right. So we held both Fusto, the main prosecutor, and Castillo, the main auditor, liable. The jury returned a verdict actually for $7.7 million, found that both of them had intentionally and knowingly lied and created fabricated evidence, used that evidence to prosecute Dr. Morse. So both of them were on the hook.
Okay, now they were not personally on the hook, were they?
Well, they were indemnified by the state of New York, but the finding was against them individually.
Talk to us about specific challenges you had in this case to win it.
So the main challenge, the really overriding challenge, was to get past prosecutorial immunity. The law in plain English allows a prosecutor great discretion on what he has to do to prosecute a defendant. If we wanted to win this trial, we had to show that the limited exception to that immunity applied, meaning he falsified evidence during the early part of the investigation. Anything else, if he falsified evidence at any later proceeding, he would have absolute immunity and we wouldn't be able to win a trial. We would never even go to trial.
So the law is that while you're gathering the evidence, prosecutor, and you fabricate something, falsify something, that's a totally different matter than when you start prosecuting the client.
Exactly, Steve. And that's the very, very narrow island on which we were able to build our entire case.
What was some of the unique aspects of this case?
Well, the uniqueness is really the finding that a prosecutor would actually be involved with falsifying and manufacturing evidence. In our experience, most of the time, our cases deal with law enforcement officials that are more like police officers or detectives or investigators. It's highly unusual to have an allegation in a case where it's actually the prosecutor who's altering or manufacturing evidence. And not only did we have that allegation here, but we proved that allegation.
There's an important legal precedent that has been set by this case. What is that?
That legal precedent is that when evidence that is not fabricated positively, meaning a fabrication by omission, has now been held by the Second Circuit to be included as fabricated evidence. So that's, in this context, what it was deliberate omission of certain categories of spreadsheets to make it look like fraud had been committed by Dr. Morse. Those included omitting social security numbers and birth dates from patients who had the exact same name to make it look like it was one patient. It was the omission of tooth numbers. So each tooth has an individual number assigned to it. So when you take the tooth number category out, it looked like the same procedure was being billed over and over and over again, but it was the exact same thing happening on tooth 3, tooth 4, tooth 5. And this is the first time that the Second Circuit held that kind of deliberate omission can be held as a fabrication.
They had to do a lot of work to fabricate this, didn't they?
They absolutely did. And that was really what the jury latched onto. It was a conscious decision. Somebody had to make this decision and alter the records, and they did just that.
The case was filed in what year?
2007.
The case was finally paid in 2016, right?
That's correct. Long time.
That's a long time.
We literally went all the way up to the doorstep of the Supreme Court before we had a final resolution on this case.
Okay, well, congratulations. You know, it's a long struggle, but that's what you do, right?
Yes, that's what we do.
Today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Leonard Morse here today, so let's bring him on. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Leonard Morse to the show. Welcome to the show, Leonard.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Do you mind if I call you Leonard?
Not at all. That's just fine.
Tell our audience a little bit about your reputation in business before you ran into Eliot Spitzer.
I had been in private dental practice for over 30 years. I had 30,000 patients. I had multiple generations of patients. I had also been heavily involved in medicine and dental medicine in the hospital situation. I had gone to NYU and had done the program in 7 years, undergraduate and graduate. I was elected to the International College of Dentists, and I had a sterling reputation. I had never been sued. I had never had any problems. I had already endured 4 comprehensive audits with 0 positive findings against me.
Who orchestrated this attack against you?
In my mind, there was no question that it was politically motivated by the Attorney General, Eliot Spitzer, who at the time was running to be governor of the state of New York.
Okay, why do you qualify it by saying, in your mind?
Well, I still feel that Eliot Spitzer is a very dangerous individual, even though he doesn't hold political office. I don't want him coming after me, even at this late stage, and claiming that I have said something against him.
Did you poll the jury after their verdict came in, by the way?
We did not speak to them after, no.
Did any jurors ever come up to you and say, hey, I know what really happened here? Or did you get that inference or anything like that?
Well, I'll tell you, there was a moment at trial where it became very clear because the jury was getting lost a little bit in the terminology of the medical terms. Then we put up the article which noted Spitzer and the fact that he had brought this claim in this indictment at precisely the moment he was being accused of being weak on Medicaid fraud. And we saw a visible reaction from a number of jurors who actually at that moment connected 2 and 2 and understood the importance of Spitzer's role. And from that point forward in the trial, they all of a sudden became very interested.
There was never any comment by his office on this case, right?
Well, he said he wasn't involved at all. He said he had nothing to do.
Other than that,
He belied the whole thing.
he targeted you because you were one of the biggest billers
Well,
of Medicaid, right?
what he was interested in, his political opponents, when he ran to be governor, said, oh, this is Eliot Spitzer. He's the sheriff of Wall Street, and he has turned a blind eye towards healthcare fraud. Right after that, I was accused of $1 million, a B felony theft in New York State. So what Spitzer was looking for was a big headline. He didn't want a garden variety theft. He wanted $1 million theft. So before you could really say somebody stole $1 million, you'd have to have a doctor's office that was billing for, a large amount of money.
Give us a little timetable. What did you lose as a result of these false accusations?
I lost everything. Within 5 days, my Medicaid number was terminated.
Meaning your business was basically...
My business was over. 95% of my patients were insured under the federal
Did your
Medicaid
patients
program.
call you? Did they contact you and say, what's going on?
No, not really. My associate took over the practice. We had a fire sale. I was forced out of business. I was forced out of the hospital because without that Medicaid number, I couldn't bill anything for the hospital. I couldn't treat any patient in the hospital. I never lost my dental license. That would require due process. It wasn't a matter of just getting indicted, but the indictment was enough for the government to pull my Medicaid number, and that just ruined my career.
What kind of stress did this put on you and your family?
Hyper stress, uber stress. We lost a lot of our neighbors. They put this story in the newspaper. They translated it into multiple languages. They posted it on the internet. And that was really the dawn of the internet. So the Attorney General's office had this prominently displayed. If anybody really Googled my name, the first story they would see was that I was a thief.
Now, I can see that you're a fighter and you were willing to fight back, and that's how you won the lawsuit, right? And got acquitted. But my question to you is, was there ever a moment when you felt totally hopeless?
At many junctures, I felt totally hopeless, because if somebody of an authority figure like Eliot Spitzer says you did it, everybody's basically going to believe that. I mean, if we went to the jail, if we went to Rikers Island here in New York and asked the inmates inside the jail, did you do it? Everybody's going to say, no, I didn't do it, and nobody's going to believe that.
But you really didn't do it.
I really didn't do it.
All your life, did you start thinking that somewhere in your life that maybe you did something wrong and this was karma coming back to hit you for any reason?
No, I never felt I did anything wrong. I always felt that I did the right thing for the patients. And we never really advertised. And my success in business was really a function of my honesty and my transparency.
I understand that after he was acquitted, that the allegation that you defrauded Medicaid was still on the Attorney General's website for 3 years after you were acquitted. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so how do you rebuild your reputation? I mean, did you ever get back any of these friends that you're talking about? Or a friend in need is a friend indeed, and many of them left for good?
Many of them left for good. Once it was over, it was over. I think the prevailing story was, you beat the charges not because you didn't do it, but you hired a really smart lawyer. Congratulations, which nothing could be further from the truth.
It's just what do you think about the American justice system as a result of this?
Well, I think there's two levels of justice, maybe for them and maybe for you. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, that don't have the resources or the smarts to fight back get unjustly accused of things, and they're just stuck with it. A lot of these cases end up with plea deals because they are afraid to go to trial. The consequences of going to trial are draconian. We were very fortunate, and our back was against the wall. During the whole time, I was under a B felony. And what that meant in New York State was that was a 25-year mandatory jail sentence. So there was no negotiations whatsoever.
A lot of these, when you hire a criminal defense lawyer, you got to pay them. They don't work on contingency.
I paid $100,000 for the criminal defense.
And that's money you'll never see back again.
Never see it back again, period. It does not come from your malpractice insurance company at all. Criminal charges are out of your pocket.
You have spoken out a lot about what happened to you, right? And you continue to do so. That's why you're here today.
Yes.
Okay, so what message do you have? You're on national TV to anybody who thinks that they are living a great life, not doing anything wrong. What do you got to tell them?
I would say just because you don't pay attention to politics doesn't mean politics won't pay attention to you. I would say if it happened to me and I had a sterling reputation and I had bulletproof records, this could happen to you. Never in a million years did I think that someone would take my records and instead of showing a grand jury my actual records, would make an illustrative summary of what I did and omit where I was doing it, the tooth numbers. Nor did I ever think that they would merge 3 patients with the same name and make an avatar, make a fake patient and a $2,300 bill that I never rendered at all. It was just blew my mind. It was beyond belief.
Isn't it more common, John, that if the government's thinking about charging someone and they have a pretty much sterling reputation, never been in trouble before, that a lawyer meets with the government and says, hey, let's work this out. Let's straighten this out. You are going down the wrong path. Isn't that more common than just arresting somebody or charging somebody?
I think that's much more common. That would be the normal expected practice, unless you're trying to make a political statement and you want maximum damage inflicted. That's what happened here.
What would you like to see Eliot Spitzer say to you?
I think he ought to apologize. I mean, he was the captain of the ship. This happened under his stewardship, and his fingerprints are all over it. I think he should be embarrassed. I think he knew exactly what he was doing, and I don't see how a person like that could sleep at night full well knowing he's sending an innocent person to jail.
Yeah, well, he kind of got his karma, didn't he?
Well, he went down in a sex scandal. And, if you want to believe in karma, and his prosecutor, he lost his job as a lawyer. He's a long-distance truck driver.
Is it really?
He's really a long-distance truck driver in California. And the auditor, they had a great auditor work on the case. His previous history, his background, he was the head waiter in Suffolk County at the golf course for $15 an hour. So he went back to head waitering job. So he had assembled a wonderful team, Spitzer. He got everybody in a room, and he knew that he could influence them, and he could actually have them make up lies and false statements and bear false witness. And these people just had no problem with it at all.
Any other parting words on national TV?
Watch out. Watch out. I mean, we live in America. I think it's a great country. I think it's the greatest country ever. But there are some evildoers out there. So never shut your eyes. Always beware of what's going on.
I want to thank you very much for being on this show.
Thank you for letting us reach a wide audience. I greatly appreciate it.
Let's talk for the general public. People are accused wrongfully all the time, and they're wrongfully arrested, right? You hear someone say, I have my civil rights. What are a person's civil rights?
Broadly, a person's civil rights are their constitutional protections afforded to them by the Constitution. They fall under a lot of different categories, but specifically when we're talking about a civil rights lawsuit, there's 4 or 5 very broad categories. The first is the right to be free from a false arrest, meaning that there was probable cause to arrest you. There's also something that's called a malicious prosecution. That means when a prosecutor or a police officer is not prosecuting you for reasons other than actually the desire to prosecute you and the fact that you have really committed a wrongdoing. There's what's called a fabrication of evidence claim. That is when police officers or prosecutors in this case have intentionally fabricated evidence, and that is the reason that you were being prosecuted. And we also handle a lot of an excessive force, that when police officers use a higher amount of force than necessary to arrest you.
It's harder for people to believe that prosecutors and police, right, are the bad guys here. How often do you see that?
Well, I'm unfortunately more often than we would like to see it. I mean, that is what we do here, and it's for that reason. But I will say I understand a normal reaction of thinking that there must be something there. When I first got the case, I had a similar reaction. I said there must be something. It's only when you actually do a thorough investigation and you see what was actually happening behind the scenes that you realize the unthinkable actually happened here. You actually have law enforcement officials deliberately, intentionally, knowingly fabricating evidence. So it does happen, and that is what this case was about.
When people are falsely accused, falsely arrested, etc., what are things that they should do and what are things that they should not do? I'll let you start with a to-do.
The first thing they should do is contact a civil rights attorney. In New York, for example, you only have 90 days to file your notice of claim with the city of New York, letting them know and preserving your rights to sue.
What happens if you're already arrested and you're in jail? How do you contact the civil rights attorney then?
I can't tell you how many people come into this office who were in jail for a number of months and have lost a lot of their ability to recover because they did not contact an attorney early enough.
Why such a short period of time?
Well, the law basically puts the burden on the person who is the victim to take action in a very quick manner, because if they don't take action, they lose their rights. They don't want these cases just stretching out over a period of years. So the law puts that burden in the first place on the client.
Yeah, the interesting thing when you said that, I thought that's a hypocritical thing to say, because if the law wants you to take action right away, how long do these cases take to resolve?
A long time.
Yeah, so once you file, it gets dragged out.
That's right. It's hurry up and wait.
What are some of the other things you should not do if you're falsely accused, falsely arrested? What you shouldn't do?
Well, we certainly do not want to see clients going to the internet, posting social media messages, giving statements out that may at some point come back to bite them. We certainly don't want to see them doing that even in the context of the original interviews with law enforcement. Unless they're properly represented, the odds are they're going to say something that's going to come back to bite them later on.
In Dr. Leonard Morse's case, his verdict, $7.7 million, that was exactly for what? Wrongful prosecution? Defamation? What did it all include?
What that was a recognition by the jury that his career had been destroyed. His livelihood had been destroyed. So we had an economist showing that what he would have earned had this never happened was millions of dollars over the course of his career. Those earnings were completely foreclosed as a result of this false indictment. It was also for the emotional damages that he had to go through, having his career destroyed, his reputation destroyed, his livelihood taken away, had an enormous emotional impact on him, and the jury recognized it. The last part of the damages were what's called punitive damages, and that was to punish and deter these defendants and any future law enforcement official that would think it's okay to alter records and manufacture evidence. So the jury hit them with a very high punitive damages amount, approximately $1 million between these two defendants, to send that message loud and clear that this was unacceptable conduct by law enforcement.
You did a good job, and I think that message was sent. We haven't seen anything like that since then, have we?
We have not.
You did a good job. A lot of people call you up, especially after this verdict. How do you end up selecting the cases that you represent?
Well, we're highly selective at this point. I mean, we have to have a very strong showing at the outset that there is a likelihood of misconduct by the law enforcement officials, and we reject the overwhelming majority of cases that come in. But the ones that we take, we fight tooth and nail, and we fight to the last minute of the last day.
Well, good work, and thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.